Welcome to Win Talk Radio, where you will learn how to talk truth and take action. Hosted by WIN, Women Impacting the Nation. Join your hosts, Sue Trombino, founder and president of WIN, Debbie Healy, public policy advisor for Faith, Family, and Freedom, Carrie Campos, co-founder of Self-Evident Ministry, and Jannique Stewart, founder of Love Protects Ministry and speaker with Life Training Institute. For more information about Win Talk Radio, go to our website at womenimpactingthenation.org. Because remember, when we show up, we win.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Women Impacting the Nation. I am Jannique and I am joined by our lovely co-host and founder president, Sue Trombino. And today we have a special guest, Jen Reelitz. I'll tell you all about her in just a second. But again, Women Impacting the Nation, we talk truth so we can also take action. And I'm really excited that we have our guest, Jen Reelitz, who has been with us before, but now she's back again. And of course, many of you know her from foodforestdiy.com. Again, that's foodforestdiy.com. Jen, thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to be talking about food forestry and why that's important, especially right now in an economy where we hear a lot about inflation, why the food forestry is so important. So Jen, tell us what you've been up to, because let me tell you, this lady is super busy. In fact, I believe if I'm accurate, she actually has on her property in Jupiter Farms, she actually has an 8,000 square foot food forest garden out there. So yep. Tell me, what have you been doing since we saw you last?
Well, I've been doing a lot of gardening and planting, and it sounds really, really simple, but back in the 1940s, about half of Americans were growing their own food. Today, that's only 0.1%.
Wow.
And I am personally convicted that growing food is the key to freedom. Right? If we're not going to be dependent on the government or global supply chains, which we saw during COVID, are very sensitive to disruption, then we need to be more independent in our food supply. Also, when you go to the store and you look at where the produce is coming from, you know, we live in Florida, we can grow tropical crops, but when I'm at Costco, they're bringing in tangerines from Morocco, watermelon from Mexico, papaya from Costa Rica. We can grow all of that here. And instead, we're shipping it thousands of miles, which doesn't really make any sense, and we're not paying American workers. And so I just really feel strongly that if you have land, that growing food is actually the best stewardship of that natural resource. All the time, I'm invited to talk to homeschool groups, and when I sit with a class of kindergarten kids, a bunch of 5-year-olds, and I say, hey guys, the Bible says that we're stewards. A steward is a manager. What do you think is the best way to manage your backyard? Do you think we should grow grass, or do you think we should grow food? Do you know what 100% of the 5-year-olds I polled? They all know the right answer. Food, food.
So they get it. They get the assignment.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. So just remind our audience, how did you actually get into this? So was this something intentional, or what is it that kind of led you to get into the food forestry?
Sure. So a couple of years ago, I had a mentor in the faith who I really admire, and she had been installing edible landscaping all around her home. And she actually lives in a beautiful home on the Intercoastal Waterway in Florida, a place where you wouldn't really expect to see this kind of thing happening. And it was beautiful. And I remember thinking that just the times we were living in as a mother of young children, I wanted to take personal responsibility for the welfare of my kids. And so I started small with just garden beds and a couple of fruit trees. And over time, I found this concept called food forest, which is just growing food in a more natural way than traditional agriculture.
Okay. And right away, though, were you a little intimidated? Because I think sometimes when people hear food forestry or land, they're thinking, I don't have that time, I don't have the budget for that, and I certainly do not have 8,000 square feet like you do.
Yeah.
So what would you say to the average person who's thinking, that sounds great, but I don't have that kind of land?
It's a lot easier than you think, and even in a small space, you can produce a lot of food. I've had people say to me, I have a black thumb, I kill everything, and my answer is, are you trying to grow things in pots? Because everyone kills things in pots.
Okay.
Once plants have access to groundwater, it gets a lot easier. And people say, well, is this hard? And I literally ask them, can you plant a stick? Because if you can plant a stick, this is a yucca cutting. Yucca or cassava is the #1 staple crop in the tropics worldwide. I take a stick about 12 inches long, plant it in the ground, and 12 months later, I'm digging up 15 to 20 pounds of tropical potatoes. It's low glycemic, it's better for you than white potatoes, it's tastier.
Wow.
Also, can you afford a $3 bag of beans? If you're stocking beans, why wouldn't you buy beans that would double as seed? And in the tropics, the #1 is pigeon peas, what's also called gandules, right? And it grows like a bush and produces beans for 5 years. And so when people think of gardening, they think of the high maintenance, raised bed, growing arugula, changing the plants every 3 months. What mother has time for that? I don't have time for that. So what is beautiful about a food forest is you're focusing on perennial, long-term crops that are low maintenance. You're talking about pruning once a year, harvesting. Other than that, just letting nature do its thing.
Very good. Now, go on.
No, I just wanted to say, okay, so what is actually a food forest?
Sure.
I mean, that is like, okay, so we're talking about this. It sounds great. And I'm going to ask you already for North Carolina and all this, because anyway, I love yucca. I grew up, in the tropics, all that. But what exactly, as we're talking about, what exactly does food forest mean?
Sure. So a food forest is where we are going to imitate nature. When you walk out into a state park or a forest, you see multiple layers of growth, right? The tallest layer is the canopy trees, 50, 60 feet tall. Then you've got the smaller trees, the understory trees. Then you've got bushes, shrubs. You've got a layer of plants growing on the ground, what we call the herbaceous layer. Then you've got plants that actually creep along the ground, like sweet potato. We'd call that a ground cover, but they're also producing tubers in the ground. And then you also have vines, right? So that's multiple layers of growth. And the idea of a food forest is, what if we took a piece of land and turned it into a forest where all of those layers, the tall trees, the bushes, the ground covers, the tubers, the vines, are all producing food.
Wow.
Now, what about in our current climate? We've heard so many people talk about how, we saw what happened with the food shortage when it came to baby formula. But it wasn't just with formula. We also see the price of eating healthy skyrocket.
Yes.
So how can someone use, especially during a time of inflation, how might the food forest come in handy for them?
Very, very handy. People have to understand there are 10,000 varieties of edible crops. Only 150 are cultivated for grocery stores. What you see in the grocery store is not there because it's the most delicious and nutritious. It's there because it's the most commercially convenient to pack and ship, and it has the longest shelf life. For example, why are blackberries in the grocery store but not mulberries? If you've ever had a mulberry, mulberries are actually sweeter, healthier for you. They have more antioxidants. They're very easy to grow. You can literally grow a mulberry from a stick. So if you know someone who has a mulberry, you can go take a hardwood cutting off their tree, put it in some potting soil, water it.
Mulberry
This is a mulberry. And see these nodes? The roots come from the nodes. So we've lost so much knowledge that's really, really basic to agriculture. And so I'm trying to instill that in my children and other children. But the reality is it's easier than you think.
Sure.
Can you do those in North Carolina?
You can. One more crop I wanted to mention that's really important is, as far as healthy produce goes. This is a leaf that's called chaya. Hunger researchers think that chaya could help solve world hunger, period. Wow. One serving of chaya leaves has as much protein as an egg. It has twice the iron of spinach. It's loaded with vitamin A and vitamin B. It tastes delicious. Chaya is a perennial shrub. So you can plant this bush in your yard and it will produce chaya leaves forever and ever. And then you can take cuttings of the plant to make more. So why wouldn't you be growing your own produce on your land that you know has not been sprayed with pesticides? It's not GMO. There aren't chemicals. You aren't slowly being poisoned. And you're growing your own food. It costs you nothing. And not to mention the mental health benefits of gardening, which is something I've recently been diving into.
Yeah.
But we're talking working in the dirt, increased dopamine, serotonin, reduced cortisol. People who garden are happier, they're less stressed.
Fresh air.
But now, for the person that's watching, and I'm sure they're thinking that sounds great, but is it expensive, and do you have to have a certain type of soil to be able to plant all of this? And how much is it to get a food forest started in your backyard?
Sure. So I've actually been developing a food forest starter kit.
Nice.
Figuring out exactly what it will look like, but it's about a dozen crops, cuttings, and seeds, which is absolutely the cheapest way to get started. Another way to get started is just by networking and connecting with your local community, finding out other people who also have a food forest, asking them, hey, can I come over for a tour? Would you be willing to share cuttings and seeds? What I kind of call friendship gardening, that's absolutely the way to go.
So actually, we're going to take a break in a minute, and when we return, I want you to tell us all about the friendship gardening. Because I think that's really huge. But before we do go to that break, I want to remind everyone of where they can actually find you. So again, that's foodforestdiy.com, Food Forest DIY. I believe you're also on Instagram at Food Forest DIY, as in do it yourself. Again, that's Food Forest DIY. Anything else before we go to that break where they can find you, or anything else?
Also Facebook.
Also on Facebook, also the Food Forest DIY? Yep. Okay, excellent. So we're getting ready to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to hear all about the friendship gardening. So stay with us again. We're womenimpactingthenation.org. See you in a bit.
Here at Win Talk Radio, our heart is to encourage people and give them hope. As Christians and conservatives, we spend so much time focusing on the negative and what the left is doing and what the Democrats are doing, when the reality is God is moving powerfully, and we see it everywhere we go. He's waking up people, opening their eyes to the truth. And so the very reason, or the very thing that we see as a negative, that the media is not showing us the positive proves that we are winning the day. And so we just want to encourage you to take a stand, take a fight, speak boldly, because people are listening and God is opening eyes. And so the reality is when we show up, we win, and God will win the day through his people when we do it together in unity.
Welcome back. We are here with our guest, our special guest, Jen Reelitz of foodforestdiy.com. And she's been telling us all about how to get a food forest started and really the benefit of food forestry and really how diverse it actually is. But I actually want to return, as we were ending that first segment, we were talking about friendship gardening. Tell us about friendship gardening and the whole concept behind it.
Sure. So one of the most economical ways to start a food forest is by becoming friends with neighbors and people in your community who currently have a food forest, because you want to connect with people who live in your zone, right? We're in the tropics, so what we can grow here is totally different from what they can grow in the temperate zone. So when you connect with people who are growing in your local area, there's just so much to learn by touring their property, asking if you can swap seeds or swap cuttings, learning what's in your yard already that can be easily propagated by a seed or a cutting. And so I have many friends in the food forest world in my area, and I'm happy to say I've helped inspire, we're probably getting close to hundreds of people to start a food forest in their yard. One of my best examples is a guy from the neighborhood who came over. He saw my food forest. Mine's a little wild, people will ask me, well,
I want to talk about that after you do that.
They'll say
they're going to flip out.
They'll say, well, will my food forest look maintained? And I'm like, yeah, if you want to maintain it. But I've got 88 fruit trees, hundreds of perennial vegetables, tropical root crops. And so it was funny, he's a little bit OCD. This is too wild. So he went home and he built these boxes for his fruit trees. He went from only having one fruit tree on his 3 acres to having 150 fruit trees in less than a year. And so I'm really proud when I see neighbors and community members catch the vision and decide that they want to do this too.
Wow, so that's very contagious then. I mean, the idea, hey, why spread COVID when you can spread crops, right? So obviously that's a good way.
Spread seed.
Yeah, you can spread seeds, right? So I think that's a really good, that whole idea though of that friendship gardening and really kind of spreading and sharing what you have so that other people can have it, but also seeing that it is doable. You don't have to be intimidated by that.
Right.
And so one other question just as a follow-up, you mentioned you have 88 fruit trees? Wow. So are there any foundational staple crops that if someone said, you know what would you recommend to get started? What are those foundational or those staple crops that people should really look to?
So in the tropics, your staple crops are tropical potatoes, bananas, beans, and greens that are high in protein. And this would translate to other climates as well, but really you're looking for calories. And the challenge I see when folks start gardening is they think salad. I'm gonna grow arugula and cherry tomatoes and peppers. That's wonderful, but all of those things only have like 30 calories. So if you want to really sustain folks, then you're talking about, again, potatoes, yams, bananas, beans, greens that have a high protein content.
Is cassava one or not?
Yes, cassava is. Cassava is. And what I love about cassava and malanga, which are the tropical root crops, is again for folks who are on a low glycemic diet, they're much better for you.
Nice.
The glycemic index of a white potato is about 80 to 90.
Sure.
Sweet potato is about 70. Yucca and malanga is about 46.
Really
Oh,
nice.
yeah, Yucca, I love that.
So
Very
fries that are a lot better for you. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Very good. I know Sue has a couple of questions.
Well, it was funny because when you were talking about, your neighbor came over and maybe he's OCD and he likes everything. I remember, and this is just kind of funny, I remember Jen had asked me to come over to her house and I hadn't been there, so I go there. And I don't ask questions like, like how much does this cost or how many acres, whatever, but I did. First of all, she says, hey, you want to go walk around my food forest? And I went, sure. My husband loves to garden. He loves to he owned a nursery, so they love that stuff. So I go out there. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I did do it. I looked out there and I went, man, this is a mess. Because you're thinking garden, okay? But it wasn't in a mean, and I was like, oh, this is messy. And I'm saying this in jest, but because everybody thinks a garden is Winnie the Pooh and Rabbit. Everything's in a line. And I was like, oh, and it was like almost like she was reading my mind. Looks kind of messy, doesn't it? I went, well, kind of. But she made the most incredible point because we don't have to have everything in a row. And I think that's what he's like, sometimes we tend to think that because that means it's a lot more work. It's a lot more, we start thinking this. But you said something that was very cool because you said, in the times if somebody's they know that we're gonna need food and they go to your neighbor's yard and they see everything's in a line. Ooh, the mangoes are here, the oranges are here, the carrots are here, the radishes are here. They know exactly where to go. Sure. Whereas in Jen's yard, you have no idea that you can make a dinner, for the next year with from green beans to the hibiscus to the everything you can think of, and nobody's going to know because everybody thinks that's just weeds.
They don't know how to use it.
They don't know how to use it. So that was really empowering for me because I thought, wow, that's really awesome. And then you don't have to take care of it as much. You just kind of let nature go like really kind of it intended.
Yes, well, and even a lot of what people would call weeds, which is just a native plant that grew in the wrong spot, a lot of them are edible, medicinal, nitrogen fixing, beneficial for pollinators. And so I've really become a student of these plants and I don't rip them out unless I need the space.
Can you give us some examples of what some people would refer to as weeds, but they're actually medicinal
Highly
or
medicinal.
even edible.
Sure. So one of the best examples in South Florida is cerasee or bitter melon. Now, if you grew up in Jamaica, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because Jamaican grandmothers have known that cerasee is medicine for hundreds of years. Well, recent scientific research has proven 19 medicinal benefits of this vine that most people would consider a noxious weed. And it's both edible, it's medicinal, Biden's alba is edible and a beneficial pollinator. Hairy indigo is a nitrogen fixer, so that means that it's actually fertilizing the soil. It's also useful for goat fodder. I am keeping chickens, turkeys, and very soon some heritage breed piglets. And so I'm getting to know the plants that are useful for animal fodder, because it can decrease your costs of
Now, what
animal
does fodder
feed.
mean? Because
fodder
people-
means it's food for livestock.
Okay.
So let's say
Like deer or something?
Yeah, well, let's say that feeding your chickens, the feed gets more and more expensive,
Yes.
just like food is getting more and more expensive. Knowing how to use the plants that naturally grow in your area to feed your livestock can decrease your feed costs and your dependence on supply chains.
Wow, that is so good. And I mean, I sit there and I listen to you, Jen, and knowing you from before, when you did your thing, but now you're just such a plethora of information, but just very. I mean, it's easy to hear what you're saying, and now we just need a sheet of paper that says, okay, this is for this. I just need that, right? So make
That's the starter kit.
But
Okay,
she
that's
is,
a-
the starter kit.
we
That's
need that
coming
starter
up.
kit. I'm about to do that starter kit. We need ones
Yes.
for different areas of the country.
Yes.
But there's a couple questions I wanted to ask you is, so how do, okay, it's awesome to do this. You have your, 2.5 acres, your whatever, and I think Jannique had mentioned it before, but how do we learn more about growing food where we live? Meaning, let's say somebody doesn't have the 2.5 acres. Somebody
Sure.
does. Maybe somebody lives and just has a little tiny yard,
Or a condo.
or a
Yes.
condo. Just
Yes.
has a plant. What can we do?
Yes.
To do that.
Yes. Well, in a condo, you can do things like doing sprouts, microgreens, a tower garden, growing inside using hydroponics. For a small yard, food forest is still a solution.
You're going to have
What's
to do
the
a definite.
hydroponics?
You're going to have to do a definition of what that
Sure.
is.
So it's
because-
growing using water and lights inside.
Okay,
So you can
perfect.
produce a lot of food using what's called a tower garden.
And it's still nutritious?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Definitely, definitely. Additionally, for a small yard, you can still produce a lot of food in a small space. My yucca plants, again, are producing about 20 pounds per plant. So if you only had 10 plants, which is about 20 square feet, you could have 200 pounds. Right.
I was just telling the family of Padrinos about you, and I said, oh my gosh, I said, she's got like 100 pounds of like.
Oh, thousands.
Whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, I
right.
just said 100,
Yeah,
a couple
I have a
hundred
lot.
pounds, because I was
Yeah.
like, I didn't want to exaggerate, but now I
about
knew I was
2,000
way.
pounds.
Oh my gosh! So I thought I was exaggerating. I said, I think she's got about 100 pounds out of one plant of these plants.
sure.
So and they were just real excited. I said, I got to put you in touch with them. So maybe you'll be growing for Padrinos.
Sure.
Yeah, you
sure.
never know.
I just
You
did
never
a plug
know.
for Padrinos, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's our next sponsor.
Totally.
But anyway, so that's how. So you have on your website. Tell me your website again.
Foodforestdiy.com.
DIY. So that is
Yeah.
do it yourself.
Yeah.
You'll have things where people can go, okay, I need this, I need
Yeah.
this, I need this.
The main thing that I offer is consultation. So for people who want to get a food forest started in their yard, the options are kind of becoming an expert and doing all the research, all the hours, all the time, or bringing in a local expert to have them walk the yard with you, see where's the sun, where's the shade, where's the wet, draw up a plan, come up with a proposal. So that's what I'm doing here locally, is trying to help start hundreds of food forests in my county.
So one question that our viewers might have is, because maybe just with plants in general, they're thinking, but what about pesticides? Do you need to have pesticides? And second,
No.
what about when you're trying to keep the animals from eating everything
Yes.
that you just planted?
Yes. So one of the benefits of my forest being a little bit wild is that it's more resistant to pest pressure and to animal pressure, right? Because when you put all of your tomatoes in a row and then whitefly finds your tomato plants, it just found all of them. Or you plant your kale and then the rabbits find it. It found all of them. But when you have a food forest and biodiversity, right, and plants growing in different places, well, the rabbits found my watermelon patch on the north side, but not on the south side, right?
Nice.
And so you just also create these happier microclimates where you're less inclined to have pests and diseases because of that biodiversity.
Ah, very good. Okay.
Well, let me say, okay, so the one of the questions we were talking about, you know, what is a food forest? But then one of the questions was, how is it different than an orchard or traditional agriculture?
Sure. Again, the orchard, the traditional agriculture, it's growing food in rows, right?
Okay,
and what
gotcha.
we're doing is in between all of the fruit trees, like an orchard, we're using all of the space, right? We're planting ground covers and bushes and vines and herbs, and I love actually planting tea gardens if you like to drink herbal tea. Kitchen gardens that are close to your kitchen, so crop harvesting is easy. There are a lot of ways to just make this really a lot of fun.
Now I have one last question when it comes to parents who are thinking, okay, but I don't have a lot of time, or they're concerned that maybe their kids won't be into the food. So oftentimes they're thinking they're not going to eat that, but you actually have, what are the ages of your kids?
An 8, a 6, and a 4.
And do they also enjoy all of this?
They do.
Okay.
They enjoy trying it. They enjoy harvesting it. They enjoy eating the meals from it. Actually giving your child a portion of land or a plant that's their sole responsibility. They're tending to a living thing.
Wow,
That's really good for kids.
That's
That
good. So you
is.
give each one of your boys an area. Do you let them pick?
Totally.
So you say, okay, what do you guys want to do here?
That not only that, I have one son who's become a bit entrepreneurial. We've been reading the Tuttle Twins, and so he decided that he wanted to have a little piece of this business. So we have all these coconuts that have been sprouting, and my son Lincoln is selling sprouted coconuts. So there's so many ways that you can make this an educational learning experience for children that's really healthy for them, that gets them outside, off their screens, doing things in the real physical world. It's good for their physical health, their mental health, their emotional health, and their spiritual health.
Okay.
And the mental health is, I mean, that, because we were just talking with Sam Sorbo, and it really, what you're doing, Jen, you know, you have your children at homeschool, but you're pouring into them your values, yet you're letting each one of them do their own thing. You're not trying to put a square peg into a round hole.
No.
You're just letting them be, and they're figuring it out who they are. You know, one a little bit more nurturing the little chickens that you have.
Yep.
Next thing you know, you're eating the. That's, by the way, it's the only chickens I tell my husband he can have is the one that lay eggs.
Yes,
Because
right.
I'm not eating. But then
No, we only have chickens for eggs. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
But that's just amazing. I remember you saying one time you were like, okay, what do you want to eat? And it's like, okay, I'll go get the green beans, go get the tomatoes, go get this, and then you put on Facebook all the time what you've made, and you got
Sure.
your malanga, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm coming over for dinner, Jen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good, so healthy,
Yeah.
you know.
And you can make it traditional things, like I recently made a spinach artichoke dip, but I substituted chia for the spinach, and so now that's a pump of protein in your delicious artichoke dip. So there's lots of fun swaps,
Wow.
really easy substitutions.
So can they also find recipes on your site?
Not yet, but we'll work on it.
Ah, very good. But we definitely have pictures, all those kinds of things. Obviously, she bought so many visuals for us today. But again, I just want to remind you of where you can find her. It's foodforestdiy.com. But before we actually wrap this up, we always at Women Impacting the Nation, we always want to remind people at Win Talk Radio that we talk truth so we can take action. But part of taking action is action steps. So if you were to speak to our audience, for those who are already chomping at the bit to get started, or for those who are thinking, okay, I think I can do this, what are some action steps that you think are very practical that people can start right now to try and get started or to try and prepare for a food forest?
So a couple of things. I would recommend educating yourself, finding resources in your area. It's as simple as Googling or YouTube food forest in your state. Find local influencers who are doing this in the area where you live,
Nice.
because they'll have region-specific expertise. 2 folks that I follow here in Florida are David the Good and Pete Canaris. Green Dreams out of the West Coast. They have books, they have all kinds of videos. Additionally, again, friendship gardening, find some locals who are doing this, who can help you. I think the two keys are education and local resources.
Nice, very good. So again, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Win Talk Radio and Women Impacting the Nation, where we talk truth so you can take action. We've been joined today by Jen Reelitz of Food Forest DIY, and we will see you soon with another episode of Women Impacting the Nation's Win Talk Radio. Again, you can find our guest at foodforestdiy.com. And remember that when we show up, we win.
Thank you for joining us at Win Talk Radio. For more information, contact us at womenimpactingthenation.org for questions, suggestions, or for more information, call us at 844-946-8255. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of Win Talk Radio. And remember, when we show up, we win.